You're welcome to start. Enjoy your session.
Okay, yeah, let's start. Okay, welcome to the first section of Asia Quito 2020. I am Wang Huaxiong. I will co-chair this section with Shiho Moruya. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first invited speaker, Shweta Agrawal. Dr. Shweta Agrawal is an associate professor at the Computer Science and Engineering Department at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. She earned her PhD at the University of Texas in Austin and did her postdoc work at the University of California, Los Angeles. Her area of research is cryptography and information security with a focus on post-quantum cryptography. She has won multiple awards, including the Best Paper Award in Eurocrypt. Today, she is going to talk unlikely friendship, the fruitful interplay of cryptographic assumption. Okay, please, Shweta.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about unlikely friendships, the fruitful interplay of cryptographic assumptions. I'd like to say that I'm happy to take questions during the talk, so feel free. All right, so let's start just by taking a look at hardness in cryptography. So as we know, the security of any cryptographic protocol is based on the hardness of some underlying mathematical problem. And usually the security of a single crypto system relies on the hardness of a single mathematical problem, such as RSA, discrete log, factoring, LWE, or something else. But sometimes, few and far between, we have some constructions that rely on an interplay of mathematical assumptions. And this is often surprising and may sometimes lead to progress on important open problems. What's really fascinating to me is that many times this interplay or this cooperation between assumptions actually just aids us in understanding the problem better and paves the way for more progress, so that later on it could even happen that you don't need many assumptions. In fact, you can reduce security down to a single assumption, but somehow the cooperation of assumptions played a crucial role in us arriving at that understanding. So in today's talk, I'd like to study some examples of this phenomenon and see if we can derive some lessons from that. A favorite example of mine is this classic work by Gentry and Halevi that shows how to use the decision Diffie-Hellman problem along with the learning with errors problem to make improvements in fully homomorphic encryption. And this work was superseded by a concurrent work by Brakersky and Vaikunthanathan that shows that actually you don't need the decision Diffie-Hellman problem, just learning with errors suffices. Then there's a recent work by Brakersky, Dotling, Garg, and Malavolta that construct a rate 1 fully homomorphic encryption scheme from the decision composite residuosity assumption and the learning with errors assumption. And this work had several interesting follow-ups. So in particular, the same set of authors were able to use techniques that were inspired by this work to make progress in constructing an indistinguishability obfuscation scheme. And that work also had several follow-ups to the extent that the latest candidates that we have today that are derived from this line of work, in fact, do not need the DCR assumption, just the learning with errors assumption suffices. There are other nice examples. So there's a work by Goel et al. That shows how to get broadcast and trace from pairings and learning with errors. There's a long line of very nice work by Anant, Jain, Lin, Matt, Sahai, and Gay that shows how to get indistinguishability obfuscation or IO from pairings and a non-standard variant of LWE. Let's call it leaky LWE. And this line of work led to this fantastic new breakthrough by Jain, Lin, and Sahai that shows how to, in fact, replace the non-standard component of learning with errors by somehow leveraging, quite surprisingly, the learning parity with noise assumption. And there's another line of work that we have with Shweta Yamada and Daniel Wicks that shows how to get optimal broadcast encryption from pairings and LWE. So for today's talk, I'm going to focus on these two lines of work. And I'd like to say upfront that the talk is going to be about the insights that these works offer about how these assumptions can cooperate with each other. So I'm not going to present any full constructions, and the tricks that I describe will not be sufficient for even a single application. So that said, let's start talking about these two assumptions and how they talk to each other. Let's start by defining these assumptions. So the pairings, right? So pairings, as you know, is defined in the following way. Let G1, G2, and GT be groups of prime order. Here I choose prime just for simplicity. And let small gi denote the generator of group gi. Then a pairing is a bilinear map, which we denote by E, that takes G1 cross G2 to GT, such that E of G1 to the A, G2 to the B is equal to E of G1, G2 to the AB. So we have this nice bilinearity property that lets us do one multiplication in the exponent. And at a very high level, the kind of hardness assumption that we have says that an adversary can only really launch generic attacks. So what this means is that an adversary can compute pairings, take linear combinations, test if an output is 0, but cannot really do anything else, roughly speaking. So I want to say here that there are, clean mathematical assumptions in this world. But for simplicity for this talk, I'm not going to get into specific assumptions. We'll just work with this high-level intuition. Then there's the learning with errors assumption, which is a completely different looking assumption. So this assumption is asking to distinguish between the following two distributions. The left distribution is this noisy inner product distribution. So how do we compute that? We start by sampling some random vector S, and then we compute noisy inner products by sampling some random vector AI and computing BI as AI inner product S plus a little bit of noise. Now here the distribution of noise is in fact important, but again for the purpose of the talk, we'll ignore it and we'll just use the fact that this noise has to be small in value. So the norm of this noise is small. And the right side distribution is just uniform over the appropriate space. So the learning with errors assumption says that an adversary cannot distinguish between these two distributions. For the purpose of this talk, I'll simplify this learning with errors assumption a little bit further and make it one-dimensional. So instead of vector in a product, we'll just think of scalar products. And this is also fine for some range of parameters, this is also fine. I do want to say that everything we'll talk about can be generalized to the standard learning with errors assumption with the vector in a product, but it just adds a little bit of complication without being too instructive. So I decided to just skip that. All right, so now that we've defined these two assumptions, let's talk about what these assumptions are useful for. So the main claim to fame of the learning with errors assumption is that it's the only assumption that yields fully homomorphic encryption, right? And fully homomorphic encryption, as you know, is the Swiss Army knife of cryptography. It lets you compute on encrypted data. So what does it let you do? You can encrypt some string, let's say X, and it allows you to perform evaluation of some circuit, let's say F, on this encrypted string, such that you end up with an encryption of f of x. So the encryption and the evaluation, they commute, right? And now when you have a secret key, you can decrypt this evaluated ciphertext to learn f of x in the clear. So this is fully homomorphic encryption, and it's tremendously useful, very, very elegant, very, very useful. And what learning with errors gives you is this very expressive functionality. So there's no limit on what kinds of circuits or what kinds of computation you can do. You can really support all polynomial sized circuits. The main feature it gives you is that the ciphertext that you end up with after you evaluate on the input ciphertext is compact and independent of the circuit size. And it's really providing a perfect solution to encrypted computation with all or nothing decryption. So what do I mean here by all or nothing decryption? Note that no matter what circuit you compute on your ciphertext, the secret key gives you all or nothing access. So if you have the secret key, you can open any possible ciphertext and learn what's inside it. This includes the original ciphertext that you performed the computation on. And if you don't have the secret key, you can learn absolutely nothing. So all the ciphertexts are going to look random to you, right? So for this kind of all or nothing decryption, LWE gives you a perfect solution. But in many of the applications that we have today, what we'd really like to support is not all or nothing decryption, but some kind of partial decryption capability. So what do I mean by this? Let's say that as before, I'm encrypting some string X. Now, what I'd like to do is come up with keys that don't let me open either everything or nothing, but let me open a particular function of my input. So my key is now going to embed inside it some circuit F, and I get a key for that. And what I'd like the decryption algorithm to do is output F of X. Given a secret key for F and a ciphertext for X, I'd like it to output F of X and nothing else. So now this is very powerful, right? Because a key for a function F does not let you open any other information about X. You can learn F of X, but you cannot learn anything else. And the security property that you can get here is that an adversary possessing keys for multiple circuits Fi cannot distinguish two different ciphertexts unless the correctness property distinguishes them. So unless Fi of X0 is different from Fi of X1, I cannot figure out whether a given ciphertext is for X0 or X1. So it's semantic security in the presence of these function keys. This is the by now famous notion of functional encryption. All right, so now in the context of functional encryption, what does the learning with errors problem give you? So it turns out that just as in the case of fully homomorphic encryption, you can get very expressive functionality. So using LWE, you can construct functional encryption that supports all polynomial size circuits. So that's great. But the catch is that you can only support restricted security gains. So you cannot have the adversary get all the information that she should be allowed to get. You can only argue security if the adversary sees a limited number of keys or restricted types of keys or some combination of these. And this is not just a limitation of our proof technique. It turns out that there are actually attacks against schemes when the adversary violates the security game. So the rule of thumb that emerges from this line of work is that the functionality can be very expressive and correctness will typically work. Circuit depth is not a problem. Typically, if you can do depth 2, you can keep going and do more. But security can be problematic with LWE. On the other hand, let's see what pairings give us. So pairings, by its very name, it only allows you to pair elements once, right? So this allows you to evaluate quadratic polynomials. You can do one multiplication and a bunch of additions, but it doesn't let you do more. And even then, I mean, pairings are very, very powerful and popular, and they suffice for many fantastic primitives. In the context of encrypted computation, they give you fully homomorphic encryption for degree 2 polynomials, and they give you quadratic functional encryption as well. But they cannot support degree greater than 2. The nice thing about pairings, however, is that the security that you get is very strong. So as I was telling you, we can pretty much assume that an adversary can only perform generic attacks, like by doing legitimate operations. And this is formalized in the generic group model. And In this generic group model, against an adversary that can only do generic attacks, it's often possible to argue security. So generic attacks, we've as a community developed, several interesting techniques by now that allow us to prevent generic attacks. So the rule of thumb that emerges here is that if correctness can work, so that is to say, well, I want to compute something, but pairings don't give me that much space to move. I can only do degree 2. But, if somehow degree 2 suffices for me, security is often not a problem. So, security is usually good. So now let's see how these two assumptions can talk to each other. The basic idea is that we're going to put LWE samples in the exponent of pairing groups. And the obvious fact that follows from this is that we can do quadratic computation on LWE samples, right? But let me also state the obvious question, which is, what is the point of doing this? And the hope, of course, is that you can somehow get the best of both worlds. So hopefully you can get the expressive functionality that learning with errors gives you, along with the nice, strong security that pairings give you. This is going to be our hope. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to describe how this can work using these two examples, indistinguishability obfuscation and broadcast encryption. These two, in fact, can be reduced to simpler objects. The first to functional encryption for NC1, and the second to ciphertext policy attribute-based encryption, which I'll define when I get to it. Okay, so both of these are important and long-standing questions. For both of these, you can get the functionality that you want from LWE. So, the rule of thumb that I told you, that LWE is very expressive, it will give you functionality that applies to these. And in both these cases, we're going to find a way to use pairings to add security to the construction. And at a high level, we're going to discuss 3 different tricks. So sort of 3 ways in which LWE and pairings can talk to each other and how this helps us make progress. All right, are there any questions at this point? Okay, so I'll move on to my first trick. The first trick that we see in this line of work is that using pairings and LWE together allows you to replace weak LWE keys with strong pairing keys. So let me tell you what I mean by that. Now, in most LWE based constructions, the ciphertext is, some kind of learning with errors encoding. So sort of some kind of noisy inner product encodes the message. There are a few different ways to do this encoding. Let's not worry about that. We'll just focus on the fact that the ciphertext is an LWE sample. And the secret key is typically an SIS sample. SIS is the short integer solution problem, which is really a dual of the learning with errors problem. It can be stated as follows. So given a fat matrix A, find over ZQ, find a low norm vector Z such that A times Z is 0 mod Q. Now, as you know, if I don't have any requirement on the norm of Z, then obviously this is a trivial problem to solve. It's just linear algebra. But it turns out that imposing the requirement that the norm should be small makes this problem very hard. All right, and I'd like to mention here that for any particular matrix A and for any fixed image, in this case 0, if I have many short vectors Zi, then these can be combined to form a kind of trapdoor for A, and this can be used to break LWE, which uses matrix A. All right, so this is what the secret key typically looks like. And decryption will work when these matrices match. So you have an LWE sample, you have an SIS sample or dual of LWE sample, and decryption is going to work out when these matrices match. Again, the specific details are not important. So now let's see how we can hope to get our partial decryption capability. Let's start by encrypting our vector x, x1 to xn, let's say. I'm going to compute an LWE encoding of the bit xi using some matrix AI, right? And again, the specific structure of this encoding is not so important. So I computed these encodings of my vector x. Now, in a very nice work, Bonnet et al. Showed that you can actually homomorphically evaluate on these encodings. So given encodings of x1 to xn, there's an algorithm that allows me to evaluate on these encodings to end up with an encoding of f of x for any circuit f of my choice. Now, this is exactly like fully homomorphic encryption, except that in this case, you also have control on the label or the matrix of this resultant encoding. So these yellow rectangles here denote LWE encodings under of a bit under a given matrix. And you can see that if I start here with encodings of xi under AI, I can evaluate on them somehow and end up with an encoding, an LWE encoding of f of x under some matrix A sub f. Okay. Now, they also show that just as you evaluated on the ciphertext and ended up with an LWE encoding, you can similarly evaluate on the public key, these matrices themselves, and end up with the same matrix that you got in the ciphertext, right? So you can compute on the ciphertext to get an LWE under some matrix, and you can compute on the keys to recover the matrix. And this makes life very nice for us, right? Because now I can do what I showed you in the previous slide. So basically, I got the matrices to match between what the decryptor gets and what the key generator gets. So I can plant my SIS instance there, and I can decrypt because these matrices match, right? So the key new idea here was that there is this nice way to do homomorphic evaluation on the ciphertext and the key that somehow matches up. But the catch is that X here is not going to be hidden in this construction. So I don't end up with the kind of partial decryption that I want. I still get something nice. I get something called attribute-based encryption, which I have not defined yet. But I don't get what I want. So I wanted to be able to hide X and, given a secret key for F, I wanted to be able to compute F of X. I don't get that. But, there's been other nice work that shows how to make further progress along this problem. So this nice work by Gorbanov, Vaikunthanathan, and we showed how you could hide X in a restricted security game. So the idea is elegant. It says that let me now encrypt my X using fully homomorphic encryption. So I'm going to now evaluate just as I did in the previous slide, but I won't evaluate on plain X. I'll evaluate on encrypted X. I can evaluate anything I want because this is homomorphic encryption. But of course, I need to be able to decrypt this in the end. So the key generator will now provide a key for F composed with FHE decryption, or I should say FHE decryption composed with F, right? And the rest of the functionality can work just as before. But as you can imagine, I mean, we can't just throw FHE on top and expect it to work as it is, because in the previous slide, I told you that these encodings do not hide the input. So why should we assume that this FHE secret key that we also included in the encoding, why should we assume that this is hidden? The main the main thing that works out here is that you can somehow argue that the FHE secret key remains hidden. The rest of the inputs do not remain hidden, but those are encrypted, so it doesn't matter. So in a restricted security game, this work shows that you can argue that the FHE secret key will remain hidden. But as I said, the security game is restricted. So you have to force the adversary not to request any keys such that f of x is 1. Okay, so x here is the challenge ciphertext. So the adversary should not request any keys that actually evaluate to 1 on the challenge ciphertext. This is the restriction. And as I mentioned, there are attacks outside the game that have to do really with the key structure in this construction and in the previous construction, and in fact in all LWE based functional encryption schemes, right? So what the attacker can do, again at a very high level, is somehow request keys for linearly dependent vectors and combine them in some way to get many short vectors for a certain matrix. So for a certain matrix, let's say A star, my adversary can combine many different keys and compute a trapdoor. And the adversary can also manipulate the challenge ciphertext in a particular way to get an LWE sample with some matrix B star. And A star and B star only match for keys where f of x is 1. So if the adversary actually gets keys where f of x is 1, then by doing the above 2 steps, she managed to get a trapdoor for some LWE sample, and this will allow her to open the sample and recover the secrets. So this is a problem. And the lesson that we have here from this particular attack is that there's, this key structure is sort of problematic if you want the attacker to get all possible keys. So we don't really know with this key structure how to prevent these correlation attacks. All right, so now enter pairings. So how are pairings going to help us? So as I told you, they have restricted functionality, but the security is very, very good. So in particular, in the context of functional encryption, you can build, you can support the functionality of quadratic polynomials, no surprises there, using pairings. And just for clarity, I have this slide where, we recap what is quadratic functional encryption. So the encryptor is going to encrypt some vector X. The key generator has some quadratic polynomial, and the decryptor is going to output that quadratic polynomial on the input X. And there are no restrictions in the security game here. So how are they going to help us in our LWE based system? The first observation is that for learning with errors, the decryption function is an inner product plus rounding, always, always, I think always. I don't know of any other decryption. Okay, so or almost always. So we have linear function plus rounding, inner product plus rounding. And pairing-based quadratic functional encryption can certainly compute the linear function. So, it can do degree 2. It cannot do rounding, but at least it can do degree 2. And if I use this pairing-based quadratic FE to compute the decryption function, then essentially I'm not giving you the LWE key, which was problematic. I'm giving you a pairing key to compute a particular linear function. Of course, we have to be careful that you can, set it up so that this linear function can be put inside the pairing-based system. I'll show you how to do it, but we can do it. And what this lets us do is it makes the attacks caused by correlated LWE keys go away. Okay, so we're going to just replace our LWE key somehow with a pairing based key. And this is definitely not the end of the story. There's many other problems that we're going to have to face, in particular related with the rounding here. But we are able to overcome one source of attack by doing this. So in a little bit more detail, let's see how we'll use pairings. So CT star is the evaluated encoding of f of x, as I told you before. And looking a little bit more closely at the structure, this is what it looks like. Okay, so it looks like some AAF transpose S plus f of x plus noise. And this can be represented as the inner product of two vectors, one which can be known to the encryptor and one which can be known to the key generator. So in a little bit more detail, the encryptor knows S. S is the LWE secret, and in this case, it is the randomness used during encryption, which is known to the encryptor. So the encryptor can sort of compute a linear functional encryption ciphertext. Linear is a subclass of quadratic, right? So linear is fine. For S comma some noise, the key generator knows this A sub F matrix. So it can compute a key. So now note that this is not the LWE SIS key, the LWE scheme's SIS key. This is now a pairing based key, right? So it's computing this pairing based key for this matrix comma 1. And decryption can let me compute the inner product, which if I subtract from the ciphertext that I have, the LWE evaluated ciphertext that I have, then I can recover f of x up to rounding. So this is how you can somehow put the LWE based decryption inside a pairing. And this is going to allow us to overcome the problem that the leaky keys were giving us before. All right, so that's the first trick. The second trick that we have is flattening the degree of computation. So this is, flattening the degree is a classic trick in LWE based schemes. And we'll see now how you can use it along with pairings. So the main idea is the following. Again, I'm given some LWE encoding of an input X, and I want to compute some deep circuit F on this encoding to obtain an encoding of f of x. So this is a common theme, right? I have an encoding of x. I want to compute an encoding of f of x. I want to do it publicly, if possible. So what will we do here? Well, we'll find a way to recast x as some other input x prime, which now has a public part and a private part. Previously, also in the example I showed you, we did this, right? So we wanted to hide x and we broke it into the FHE encryption of x and the FHE secret key. And then we only revealed the FHE encryptions and we found a way to just somehow hide the FHE secret key. So this sort of high level idea can be applied in many contexts, as we'll see. So we recast the input in this way. And we'll similarly recast our function f as a equivalent function f prime, such that f prime has high degree computation on the public part and low degree computation on the private part. And we'll do this deep public computation downstairs, as I like to call it. So not in the exponent. So this you can do whatever you want outside the pairing. And there's some crucial component that you have to do with the secret part, this, shallow private computation. This you can do upstairs in the exponent. And there's a way to, combine them to get the final output that you want. So let's see an example of this idea. Let's go back to an old, very elegant construction of fully homomorphic encryption by Brzezinski and Vaikunthanathan. I'll only show it to you for quadratic polynomials, but it can be extended beyond. So now let S be the secret key. In order to encrypt some bits x1 and x2, we just sample, u1 and u2 randomly. These are just, think of them as the LWE labels, and we compute the encoding as UI S plus noise plus XI. So this is the encoding in this construction. And now I want to evaluate on these encodings to get an encoding of some quadratic function, let's say x1, x2. So what do I do? Well, Brzezinski and Vaikunthanathan suggested this really beautiful idea. I mean, very simple in hindsight, very, very nice, natural idea. That let's not look at the encryption and think, what do I do? Let's instead look at the decryption. What is the decryption that I want? So let's rewrite this equation with the decryption view in mind. So I can write xi is approximately ci minus uis, right? So this is just following from how I defined ci. And now if I multiply these two equations, then I get x1, x2 in the left-hand side, and I get some polynomial in the right-hand side. And what they observe is that, if I set my multiplication ciphertext as all the coefficients of this equation, where the variables are s or powers of s, right? So if I set my ciphertext as C1, C2, this vector, C1, C2, C1, U2 plus C2, U1, and U1, U2. Then if I know S, then I can just take an inner product of this vector with another vector that, comes from S1 minus S and S squared. And this is going to give me x1, x2 plus noise. And, that's good enough for me. I'm not discussing how to round it. There are various simple ways to do it. All right, but since in our case, we want partial decryption, we can notice that this kind of key structure is not good for us, because if I give you one S squared, I mean, obviously, you know the secret key S, and this will also allow you to open the original ciphertext, which I don't want. I want you to learn the product x1, x2, but I don't want you to learn what is x1 and what is x2. So let's see if we can change this somehow. So let's recall our decryption equation. It was this. And what we observed in our work with Alon Rosen is that if we group the terms separately, so if I just write the same equation with a different grouping, then actually I can write this decryption as an inner product of two vectors, which, well, an inner product of two vectors plus something, but this inner product will now have this nice property that one of the vectors can be known entirely to the encryptor. So the CI are the encodings which the encryptor generated herself. The S is the randomness which the encryptor picked herself. So she knows this whole vector. And these UIs are just these LWE matrices, right? Or LWE labels. So these, in fact, can be part of the public key in this construction. And these can be known to the key generator. So now I can write down this inner product in a way that one component can be computed by the encryptor, one component can be computed by the key generator, and C1, C2 are anyway public. So the decryptor can anyway know them, right? So in a little more detail, the encryptor can provide all these encodings CI, as well as a linear FE encryption of this vector. And the key generator similarly provides the matching linear FE key for this vector. And computing C1, C2 herself, the decryptor can take the appropriate inner product and get x1, x2 as desired. So the key insight here is that the quadratic term, which is Ci, Cj, actually it's public. So you don't have to expand your ciphertext in computing Ci, Cj and encoding it in any way. You can just, reveal all the Ci's as they are in the clear. They're already encodings. And the secret part, which is the Ci times S, this is what you put inside a linear functional encryption scheme. So you end up with only linear sized ciphertext instead of quadratic sized ciphertext. And this is important. So the deep computation is on the public encoding CI, and the shallow computation, which is key dependent and secret dependent, this is only linear, right? And this example that I showed you is only for degree 2, but we can generalize it to NC1. Furthermore, this trick turns out to be very useful. So in the construction that I showed you, we get a bounded collusion functional encryption scheme, whatever that is. But the trick turns out to be very useful in other contexts as well. So for instance, again, since I'm talking about how to construct IO, it was shown in a couple of works that if you have a functional encryption scheme that supports the computation of a PRG, a pseudo-random generator, then this suffices to build IO, right? Now, in the previous slide, what we did was we reduced the degree of NC1 to public NC1 and private linear. If I try to use this trick to compute FE for pseudo-random generator, it turns out not to be secure because you're letting the adversary learn these exact linear equations in secret components, and this is going to be leaky and problematic. So it's not going to help you. But a very nice idea by Anant et al. Was that let's not reduce the degree down to linear. Let's only reduce it to quadratic. So this is, one way of looking at this, right? So if we reduce it all the way down to linear, then it's too leaky. But if I reduce it to quadratic, then what the adversary sees is not linear equations in secrets, but quadratic equations in secrets. And multivariate quadratic polynomials are in general difficult to solve. So you can hope that this system of equations hides the secret, and you can use this idea to build functional encryption for PRG. I should emphasize that this way of presenting it is just my way of looking at it. It's not that, this is not necessarily the way that the authors thought about it, but it's, in my mind, it's a very nice idea that, if you go all the way down to linear, it's problematic. But if you go down only to quadratic, then this can still be secure. So this is a trick which I think can probably be used in other contexts as well. And this construction by Anant et al. Led to many nice advances in the construction of IO from standard assumptions, the latest of which, as I mentioned before, gets rid of the, this leakage altogether. So by using learning parity with noise, which I won't have time to get into, they can manage to get construction from standard assumptions, which is amazing. All right, so this brings me to my third and final trick, which is how to use pairings to break correlations between LWE samples. So here, what we're going to try to construct is some kind of functional encryption scheme. So this is a ciphertext policy attribute-based encryption scheme. Let's see what this is. Here we have with us multiple files whose data is encrypted. And each of these files has embedded in it some access control policy. And the secret keys correspond to certain attributes of the user, such as their role, their affiliation, and so on and so forth. And as you might expect, we'd like decryption to work if and only if the attributes in the key satisfy the policy embedded in the file. And the kind of security that we'd like is that if some collusion of users comes together, then they're not able to open any file that they could not have individually opened on their own. This is the property of collusion resistance. Here, I do want to emphasize that neither the policy in the files nor the attributes in the keys are hidden. What's hidden is only the content of the file. So you're not actually encrypting, you're not actually performing computation on any encrypted data here. The computation is performed on public data, which is the attributes in the user's key. We can also look at this dual notion, which is key policy attribute-based encryption. And here the role of the policy and attributes are reversed. So now the file has the attributes and the key has the policy. So let's see if we can build a CP-ABE or a ciphertext policy attribute-based encryption scheme. What we're going to do, as I alluded to before, is that using LWE, we'll get a one key solution. So a solution which is completely insecure. It's not collusion resistant. And we'll use pairings to add collusion resistance to this recipe. So let's see how we can do that. Okay, now we don't have a full answer to this problem. So CP-ABE from LWE, there are only very few constructions for restricted function classes. But KP-ABE, it's dual, the key policy variant. This actually has some beautiful constructions. So you can handle all polynomial sized circuits. And a natural idea, of course, is that can I take this KP-ABE and somehow use it to construct a CP-ABE? Since it's already supporting all poly-size circuits, maybe there's a chance. And that's what we'll try to do. Okay, so let's look at the algebraic structure of the ciphertext. So this is again the same construction that we used in one of our previous examples by Bonnet et al. The ciphertext of this construction satisfies this very nice property that the encryption can be divided into two steps. So you can generate encodings for all possible inputs X, without knowing the input. And then when you know the input, you can pick and choose the encodings corresponding to the bits. Okay, so here's an idea. I want to construct ciphertext policy ABE. So I want my encryption to embed some function F, but I only know how to embed F in a secret key since I have a key policy scheme. So maybe what I can do is actually compute the secret key using the scheme that I know, which embeds F, and then simply return the ciphertext for all possible inputs X. So this, this is fine in terms of functionality, right? I've given you encodings for all possible X. You can pick and choose what you want. And I also gave you the secret key corresponding to the circuit F, so you can decrypt. But of course, it's not secure because I gave you both possible encodings for a single column. So this is, all possible encodings for every bit of X and every value of the bit, right? So if I give you the encodings for both possible values of a single index, this is insecure. But okay, maybe I can encrypt it. So maybe I have as many public keys as the number of elements in this matrix, and I just encrypt all these entries. And the secret key, which knows, or the key generator who knows the input X, can pick and choose the corresponding secret keys and output that. So this will allow me to decrypt exactly the encodings corresponding to X, and I can go back to the functionality that I had before. But it's easy to see now that this is not collusion resistant. So if I request a key for the all zeros and the all one string, then all security is lost because the entire matrix of secret keys is now with the adversary, and this is obviously insecure. So the main idea is to use pairings to add collusion resistance. So I'm going to use pairings to encrypt each of these LWE encodings, right? And let's see how we can hope to prevent collusion attacks. Now, a standard trick in pairings is that for every user, I randomize its key with a fresh randomness delta U. So what does this do is that if I have a key using delta U and you have a key using delta U prime, then we cannot mix and match our keys because these components will be different. So I'm going to somehow set up the scheme so that the decryptor recovers delta U times the appropriate encoding corresponding to X. And I'll get collusion resistance because of this property that I cannot combine them. So now how do I ensure that exactly one of the two encodings per column is selected? The way we do it is we introduce position-wise randomness and use a pairing to cancel out one of the two random terms per column. So in a little more detail, we have now in our public key, just as before, a matrix of public keys, but now this is a bunch of random elements in the exponent. And the ciphertext encodings, the LWE encodings, are masked with these random elements. What the key generator can do is provide the unmasking factor for the appropriate entries, right? So now, when I take a pairing of the correct encoding with the matching secret key component, the masking factor goes away and I get, the encoding that I want, exactly one of them. I cannot get both of them anymore. So that's nice. So we managed to have a way to, get rid of collusion attacks, which was our main problem before. And we managed to find a way to select 1 out of 2 encodings, which is nice. It's not terribly surprising because, it's a quadratic operation anyway. It's not surprising you can do it with pairings. But the main question is, I want to actually compute on these LWE encodings, right? I want to compute an NC1 circuit on these encodings, but now these encodings are sitting in the exponent. So even though I selected them correctly and I cancelled out the problematic randomness, etc., how do I compute a deep circuit on these encodings? The happy coincidence here is that the structure of this evaluation algorithm, the algorithm that lets me evaluate on these encodings, the structure of this algorithm is actually linear. So even for a deep circuit, it's only a linear algorithm. So the non-linear part again can be done downstairs, and upstairs in the exponent, you only need to do something linear. So the structure of the decryption algorithm of BGG plus says that you should first compute a linear function such that you get, the message plus some noise. And then you should remove the noise to recover the message. So it's a linear function plus rounding, just like I said. Now in the exponent, you can surely compute the linear function, no problem. The question is, what should I do next? Because now I got, delta times scaled m plus noise, and this is exponentially large because the delta is exponentially large. But what we can do is we can also provide the delta in the exponent. So now by kind of taking, trying brute force all possible values of m cube by 2 plus noise, you should be able to decrypt. So it's like a brute force discrete log. For this, of course, you have to ensure that this noise here is polynomially small. And this turns out to work also by a very happy coincidence. So there's a couple of very nice works that show how to leverage the asymmetry in noise growth, which is a very specific property of these kinds of LWE-based systems. The details are not important for us. Just suffice to say that for NC1, using this extra trick, which somehow exists by happy coincidence, you can bound the noise to be polynomial. But this only then works for NC1. So we don't know how to go beyond NC1. So what we get from these tricks is that you can get a CP-ABE for NC1 with certain compact parameters. And this yields the first optimal broadcast encryption scheme. All right, so to summarize my talk, we saw 3 different tricks that allow pairings and LWE to cooperate with each other so as to achieve something that neither of them individually could. Right? The first trick that we saw was how to replace LWE keys, which are leaky and lend themselves to attacks, with strong pairing keys. The second trick we saw was how to flatten the degree of computation. So we can often take LWE encodings and flatten the degree so that the deep part is it's public and it can be done downstairs, not in the exponent. And the shallow part is private, but we can put it in the exponent and do it there. Because it's linear or quadratic, it's not a problem for pairings to support it, and the security of pairings helps us to get a secure system. And the third trick that we saw was how to break correlations between LWE samples by moving them to the exponent and randomizing them with different randomness. So here, of course, you have to find a way to cancel the randomness, and then you have to find a way to do the computation in the exponent. But at least for this one application that we saw that it can work out. So let me conclude with a few open problems. The first open problem, which to me is the most compelling one, is can we remove pairings? So pairings are not post-quantum secure. And it's really, while it's, in a way, really amazing that they can talk to each other in this way and, give us something nice. It would be even nicer, if we could stop using them. I'd love to see pure LWE based constructions for these applications. Or, okay, if you can't replace pairings altogether, then, or you can't remove them altogether, can we at least weaken the requirement on them? Maybe you don't need the exact bilinearity that pairings give you. Maybe some kind of approximate version suffices, and maybe this approximate thing can be built again from lattice-based assumptions. So we'd like maybe to have some new, simple, plausible assumptions from lattices that are not LWE, but are also not as complex as multilinear map-based assumptions. So by now, as a community, we have a good understanding of the security of multilinear maps. Since pairings themselves are so useful, I mean, is there a way to just do degree 2 maps from lattices which don't have all the problems that high degree maps do? So this is another very nice question. And it seems like it should be doable just by wishful thinking, if nothing else. And finally, can we have other applications of these ideas? So we saw 3 ways in which these two structures can talk to each other effectively. And we saw a few applications of them in the early part of the talk. But I feel almost certain that there must be other very nice applications that we haven't yet found. Because the serendipity is somehow too much. I mean, there are just too many things that work out here to have only these applications. So I'm sure there are other very nice applications that we could find, and I invite everyone to look at them. With that, I'll conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the very nice, inspiring talk. Now we have time for questions. Okay, yeah, I think we get some people put up some. Okay, so Kevin, okay, yeah. Yuji, you have some question? Hello? Hey?
I had pasted my question into chat, but question is, what is a good candidate to replace pairings in this construction?
We don't have any good candidates. That is one of the open questions. And ideally, we'd like to have something which is post-quantum secure.
Okay. So any other question, comment? No, okay, thank you, sir. Okay, yeah, here you have.
I see a question in the chat.
Yeah.
During your talk, you mentioned multi-quadratic also playing a role, but it seems out of the conclusion. Is it eliminated by now? Yes. Okay, so first of all, in the construction that I showed, or well, whatever little piece of the construction that I showed, I said pairings and leaky LWE, but actually I should also say MQ over there. So, you know, that construction does also rely on the hardness of MQ. But in the latest work by Jane, Lin and Sahai, where they use the learning parity with noise assumption, they actually eliminate this leakage. So now it is eliminated, yes. But then you have to assume LPN as well. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Okay,
So
you have more questions, Stephen.
yeah, I can read this. Do you think that using pairings to add collusion resistance necessarily requires generic group or knowledge assumptions? So I think you, this is a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, it would be great to remove the generic group type of assumption or the knowledge assumption that we have. At the moment, the constructions that we have sort of imply a kind of weak obfuscation. This is about the third trick, just for everybody's benefit. This is about the third trick that we used for broadcast encryption. This question pertains to that. So there we finally get constructions whose security is either in the generic group or uses knowledge assumptions. The way that we do it, you know, yes, we seem to need that kind of knowledge assumption because we end up using a kind of obfuscation which needs this knowledge assumption. But I'd love to see somebody get rid of it. Like maybe there's something else one can do. Then there's a third question here. There's a tension between the exponential LWE modulus and the polynomial noise in LWE. Do we know how to find parameters in these settings? Is it practical? Okay, so is it practical? No. I mean, at the moment, we're struggling even with feasibility quite a lot. So I don't think we can say these constructions are practical. As for this polynomial noise, this is a very good point, and this is something which ends up being a real thorn in your side in any of these constructions. This is a huge problem. I mean, we know how to solve it now, but this is in general problematic, but it needs some techniques using which it can be solved. So yes, you can find parameters for these settings, and no, they will not be practical. More questions?
Okay, yeah. So if no more question, probably we also run out of time. Now is 2:18. No, my time is okay. 3:18 in class time. Okay. Okay. Good. So perfect. We will finish this section, and we thank you again, Shweta, for the wonderful talk. And thank you all for attending. So we are coming back